Hey, welcome to the Great Northern Cascades Division in N-Scale. There's been a ton of progress on the layout recently. I had a good friend of mine, Rich. He came all the way out from the Seattle area. Ironically, took Amtrak's Empire Builder service to get here and go back. It's quite a trip for him. But while he was here, we built over 300 feet of triple-deck benchwork. So this video is getting kind of long because it shows some of the time-lapse videos of how we went through it, how we put the different benchwork sections together, some of the design considerations as we went through it, things like deck height, deck separation, viewing distances, all kinds of things that you need to think about when you're doing multi-deck layout. We did have some fun along the way. We went up to Duluth, we checked out Lake Superior Railroad Museum, we went and rode North Coast Scenic Railroad. We also went out to Duluth, went out to Osceola after we went to Duluth. We took a couple of days where we were just kind of playing around. So there's clips that are kind of spread throughout this that show some trends running, checking out some of the trends at the museum, things like that. I hope you enjoy this. Like I said, this one gets a little bit long, but now that the core of the benchwork is done, I just got to figure out some of the end peninsula pieces and moving between different decks, the really simple things like that. But at least now there's pretty solid progress that's been made. It's given me a lot of motivation to keep on going now. I can start to see how trends would actually start to move around here. And there is also one little clip of the first trends that are technically running down in the basement. So thanks for watching. If you like this, please subscribe so you can follow along to more updates as they're going to be coming out. And we'll be back again soon. Bye. So we've somewhat come to the end of the second day, or at least the second night of building, and we've now got all of the first level and the second level done. Got some rough legs holding in the lower level. They'll end up getting replaced by 2x2. They just came in there to hold it and keep it somewhat straight. And then got about half of the upper level supported by these 45-degree brackets. Okay, let's kneel down, get some cool shadow effects. And so there's another 3 or 4 45-degree brackets that we'll end up putting in on that upper level. Otherwise, that's all done. Lower level is pretty much bang on. I think it's 32 feet of benchwork that we're looking at. I think when we put the laser level on it from one end, we ended up, I think it was 1/8 of an inch high on the far end all the way down here, which is nothing over the course of 32 feet in end scale. This little dropout section, I'm not sure if I'd mentioned it earlier, is where we're going to have Viaduct coming out. So the kind of plywood empire section over there, loosely representative of where Spokane depots are going to be, station depots are going to be. So we're going to have the Great Northern Depot, and even that was actually Union Station, just at the south side for Union Pacific where Milwaukee came in. We're going to kind of take some liberties, and we're going to say it's based on a prototype, but it's probably going to be Northern Pacific Depot. It'd actually be right there. So as they would come out, depart Spokane to the west, and then going to again somewhat go into Viaduct. I think it would be the Latah Creek Viaduct. Again, taking some amount of liberties, and that you would have the GN line at the back. We're probably going to run the Northern Pacific line over the front. We actually hit up Scale Model Supplies here in Minneapolis today, and we were able to find a couple of the micro-engineering Viaduct kits. So I think I got 2 of the 320 feet Viaduct kits, and then I got 1 of the 40-foot extensions. That gives us an extra pier, and so that gives, what would that be, 4 feet total actual length. And so it ends up like 760, I think, scale feet. So I think that would look really, really cool. And so the idea here is that what we'd end up having is, you know, there's actually going to end up be, you know, 2-inch foam or something that's actually going to raise it up a little bit so that you could then carve down in for the river. And then because it's all open benchwork, rises would then bring it out. Come down here and you'd end up level straight away across the viaduct. And then once you come over onto this less than 8-foot section, round about, you know, coming into the corner is where then the 2 lines will come back together. So I think on the lower level, this will be a really good focal point having a viaduct. It's one where having that lower level gives it a really good opportunity to do something big like that. As we would spin around over in this section here, this is where we go into the Cascade Tunnel loosely on the lower level, and then we'll be popping out again on the second level. So opportunities for some trestle bridges, again, might try and figure out, might not be absolutely prototypical, some kind of trestle bridge doing the same thing, might drop the deck a little bit, but typically the trestles wouldn't be that high. This, I think, dropped 8 3/8 of an inch or something like that. It was somewhat complete by chance. Whatever it is we ended up in, by the time you'd have a small plywood sub bed to kind of keep the viaduct in place, it actually ends up perfect for the height of those micro-engineering viaduct kits. So this ends up 90-some feet, scale feet in end scale. The trestle bridges wouldn't have been that high as you came into the Cascades coming up through the pass, so I wouldn't drop it quite this much, but again, just a good opportunity to do something a little bit different. So tomorrow, I think we're going to head up to Duluth. I'm going to go and ride North Shore Scenic Railroad and check out the Duluth Tram Museum up there, and then get cracking on, well, finishing up the supports on the second level, and then adding in the third level and the blue tap there left on the wall is roughly about the height of where we're going to go, and we'll kind of figure out once we get those next set of modules built if that's going to work out before we screw them.
sequence test of Locomotive 227. Headlight and marker lights on. Running board lights on. Drive wheel set number 1 on. Drive wheel set number 2 on. Number 227 was one of 18. Now the high wall signals all is clear, and the 227 begins the last leg with a load of iron ore from the northern Minnesota mines for export.
Including the Lake Superior Railroad Museum, St. Louis County Historic Urban, which was once the flagship of the United States Steel Company's Great Lakes fleet. It was a brewery, originally founded by Sidney Luce in 1857. The current brewery was constructed in 1882, and its name, A. Ficker and Company, came in 1884 from August Ficker and other shareholders. Production of their beer continued for 40 years until Prohibition began in 1920. Many breweries shut down during this time, but Ficker stayed open by making candy bars and bottling soda pop. Vickers was one of only 11 national breweries to survive and brew again after Prohibition was repealed in 1933. And the fun started all
There's the cemetery. Yep.
18. This fire actually started south of Croix, Minnesota, about 20 miles south of Duluth, on October 10, 1918.
I was talking to my friends and I was trying to squeeze it up. Someone scared me and it just went like that and it came right out. I mean, it hurt, but I got it out real quick.
There's a staff on the train about a membership application.
I'm next.
What?
Biden's election day. Here, Mr. Jim. Mr. Jim, the Wilson.
Alright, so all of the bench work around the side, save for a couple of sections on the second level, are all now complete. Again, shadows looking awesome, kind of coming down from all the lights. So again, left out a couple of sections on the second level, just so we can figure out the grade as it will be coming up from Cascade Tunnel around back in. But everything's done. We figured out that at this point we'll probably right around 150 feet of benchwork has been constructed. Those two sections will bring it over just over 160 feet. Each section is 8 foot long. So let's talk a little bit about height of benches, because as you kind of come up to the side, you'll also see that they kind of stagger themselves in a little bit. So remember that everything is going to be about compromises. So the lower level is 32 inches off the ground. So as I'm standing, that comes to just below my hip height. I'm right at 6 feet tall. If you're sitting on a stool, if you're sitting on a chair, it's actually a really good height. Height from the top of the first level to the bottom of the second level, so basically bottom of where the fascia is going to be right around here. That's right around 17 inches. So that gives plenty of clearance, because remember that with the open bench work, the track's going to be brought up on risers a little bit. So if we think over at Spokane Station, right now it's sitting on plywood, but I think I'd mentioned in one of the earlier little snips, it's probably going to be 2-inch foam to raise that up, so you're going to be able to carve the river that will go between the two different depots. Then from the second level up to that top deck, there you have, I think it was 11 inches. So it gets a little bit tight, but again, that's trying to figure out elevation. So if we think, as I'm standing here, this comes right around, you know, chin height, mouth height for me. So as I'm looking, I can still look down a little bit on them. If it was any higher, I've seen some that come almost up to nose height. That ends up a little bit too high. If you were just rail fanning, if you were just having a scenic one running around, that would be perfect. But if we think as to what it's going to be in the middle here, so these blue lines are representing the peninsula that's going to be getting built next, what we're going to end up with is on the top deck into bay on this side. On the other side of the peninsula, I'm going to have Seattle. So that's a big yard, and that's a big station platform area. If we raise it up to, you know, almost eye height, where I'd be able to watch the trains go by right at eye height as if I was rail fanning, that would make it really, really hard to then try and actually do any kind of operating up there. So distance between second level, third level, a little bit tighter than what I would have wanted, but again, if we're standing, this is about where we would be. I'm coming a little bit closer to me. This is about where we would be if we were actually running trains, if we were following trains. So it's all designed for sight distances, really, the viewing distances. viewing angles, things like that. So this top deck is not obstructing the bottom deck at all. And in reality, on the bottom deck, the skyboard will come out 6 inches, 8 inches. Bottom deck is 24 inches deep, just in case we need it. Things like Spokane, we will. Things like Wenatchee, where there'll be a big yard, we will. Maybe at the end of the peninsulas here, so we can get nice, big, broad radius curves. We will need those 24 inches, but otherwise, skyboard will probably pop out a bit. But we've got enough viewing angle that we can comfortably see it. Part of that is because the second deck is then 20 inches deep. These ones are actually a little bit different. These are all 20 inches, so maybe we'll spin around. Viewing angles will still work at 20 inches. So here we go. So this bottom deck is now really 24 inches. This is now 20 inches, so again, we've got even less obstructions. And then when we come up to here, this deck is actually 16 inches. And so again, we've got plenty of room now. Why is the top deck 16 inches if it's already high enough? Because now we have all of this. So I'm pretty much at my eye height. Come up. I'm pretty much at my eye height now. So again, I can look, I can still see everything on the second deck. I can still see all the scenery as it will be getting built up in there. Sitting on a stool, the stools I have are 29 inches tall. If you're sitting on a chair, this is actually still enough that you can still comfortably see everything. It will be a really good spot for rail fanning, I think. So it means as you then look down the benchwork, you can kind of see 24 inches, comes into 20 inches, comes into 16 inches. So aesthetically, it's actually kind of cool. We're not blocking off the viewing angles, we're not blocking off sight lines. I think this little dropout and again pushed back for where essentially what modern day late Oak Creek Viaduct is. It's kind of what we're going for just because of trying to compress things. But a viaduct, and call it whatever we decide to make up, will look pretty cool, and again, it gives a little bit of different visual interest. So mentioned these 3 decks are all 20 inches. Part of that is to make sure that we could have nice big broad radius curves coming around the peninsula, because that isn't actually really going to be used. The peninsula is going to come out, so maybe it's a little bit of a west of 4 feet, sorry, but potential for having some kind of pass-through, potential for having some kind of storage there. Haven't decided, but it's mostly so that the center peninsula wall has something to attach to here. Didn't want to attach it in the wall just because of where the studs ended up being, and because of where there's an outlet, and because of the baseboard and the molding around the top. So this is all starting to come together. Like I said, I think it's 150 feet, something like that, of benchwork that's now being put in place. The center peninsula is now the next thing that's going to go in. That's going to be 24 feet long, and then again with benchwork on either side of that and across 3 decks of that, there's another there's another almost 150 feet. What's that, 144 feet? Something like that. There's a lot of benchwork that's going to be coming in here within the next day or two if we can get this part built too. And that's still then not accounting for the little mushroom turnaround part there to represent the Cascade Tunnel. It's still not accounting for the very large end of the peninsula that's going to come in here. Actually going to expand out this section into somewhat of a peninsula here as well, which wasn't on the original plans, but I think needing to expand out to be able to put Hilliard in a little bit more space than had originally looked. See where my kids have been hanging out on their blankets as we've been doing all this. So coming together really well. A lot of work, more work than I was expecting to do this week, but it has been fun. We have still been able to play around with friends. We're going to head up to Osceola later on today, so we'll see how much we get done today, tonight, tomorrow. But definitely starting to take shape. Alright, I didn't really have any video as we were putting up this middle peninsula, but it is in place. This was a bit of an effort. This was a lot of thinking through and trying to figure out getting everything aligned. But basically it's a freestanding wall built from 2x4s down the middle there. So freestanding as in it's not actually screwed into the floor. There is one additional 2x4 that goes into the joist and screwed up there. Not sure if that's going to end up staying in place. We'll see once the rest of it is in place how it holds itself. And then coming down, rather than having, you know, the benchwork just on either side like we have over here, 24, 20 and 16 inches on this side, basically the furring strips that go through for the cross pieces as part of this open benchwork run all the way through. That makes it a little bit easier in terms of you can then screw straight into those 2x4s. So if we see every other one of the grid pieces and screws into the 2x4s, that somewhat also helps keep it level from side to side, but it's mostly to get the height right. And then 2x2 legs as well. So again, the 2x2 legs are what help. They're all cut at the exact same height to match the benchwork. So this whole thing does kind of flex and twist, or did kind of flex and twist when it was put in place. You know, the whole idea is that the furring strips can move a little bit, the plywood on the outside can move a little bit, but once it was all in place, once all the screws are in, once the legs are on, it did kind of give it a whole lot of structure and make it very, very strong and rigid for something that's not actually screwed down on the ground. On the far end, it does then connect into the benchwork down here. Second and then the third deck will connect in the same way, basically just a 2x4 to fill the gap, screws it all in. And so again, overall, you start to see this is 24 feet is what we're looking at here in terms of total length. So once the second and the third decks go on, which will follow the exact same process, and then that'll be the bulk of the benchwork down on the ends of the peninsulas and the part where Hill Yard is going to be. So in the middle here, I'm going to follow this kind of same almost Christmas tree approach. I think I'm going to make this the top deck 20 inches as well, just so that we have a little bit extra space. This side wall here, it's 24 inches, 20 inches, and then comes down to 16 inches on the top. But because we're going to have Interbay on this side of the peninsula wall and then Seattle on the other side of the peninsula wall up on that top deck, I think 16 inches might get a little bit too narrow. Worst case, I can, you know, pop the skyboard out a little bit if I don't need all the space on the approach in and out of either of those two places. But I think I'd rather make the benchwork a little bit deeper just to make sure, kind of like we have here, where on this back wall, all three levels at 20 inches, and then I can just move the backboard as needed depending on what the radius of the curves needs to be to get them in there. So, very happy with how all this is going. My happy helper Rich headed out on Amtrak last night. I dropped him off at St. Paul station. He's on his way back to Everett. He started talking about overtime and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, this is probably time to kick him out. So I'm gonna have to try and do the second and third levels by myself. I think we can just about manage that if I've got the kids to come and help me as well. But now as we start to, like I say, walk around, you can see just how involved this is all becoming, how much bench work this is all becoming. At the moment, I think we are right around 200 feet of bench work has been built, and then with each side of each deck in this middle peninsula being 24 feet, that's going to add just shy of 100 feet. So it's going to be at 300 feet of bench work by the time we've got the second and third level done. this is now with that big middle peninsula all finished up. Second and third decks are complete, and so that now puts us at something like right at 300 feet total benchwork, which is kind of crazy. So middle deck, top deck, both at 20 inches, both following that same procedure as was used on the bottom deck in terms of those 1x3 firing strips running all the way through. I need to put in some 45 degrees here just to kind of help keep everything in place. It's fairly solid side to side, but we'll see. Did also put in some kind of 45 corner pieces on the end of the peninsula there. Just that will give something for the fascia to kind of bend its way around in time. And also on the lower level of this back wall, swapped out the legs for 2x2s rather than 1x3s. A little bit something that I'd wanted to do. So overall now we start to walk around this whole thing and get some kind of scale going on. So I still think, without having a complete track plan of everything, we'll be looking at something like 425, 450 feet of total track. This is kind of probably the next thing I need to work on, is figuring out the incline around here to get back into that second level. This video is probably getting to be a long one already. This is the core of the benchwork anyway. I really just now need to figure out the three ends, this one end piece, the one end on this middle peninsula, and then the end where Hilliard is going to come out. But overall, pretty impressed with how this has gone. Pretty intimidated now that I'm starting to look at it in terms of starting to have to lay track on this and to figure out electrical on this. That's one thing that I'm kind of thinking through as I'm going through. I need to come back, drill holes all the way through all of the cross-piece firing strips to be able to pull a multitude of electrical lines, low voltage lines, DCC bus, things like that. So I'm going to call this one good for now. I'll be back. I have no idea why, as I start to make progress on some of the rest of the benchwork pieces. Split that out, maybe just make them in a little bit shorter videos. But hope you've been enjoying this. Big thanks to Rich. He came all the way out from the Seattle area for this. He did make it back in the middle of me finishing up the second and the third level on that middle peninsula. Not going to have him around anymore to kind of cajole me, but I'm sure he'll annoy me from afar to get this done. So I hope you've been enjoying it. Please do subscribe, follow along. Let me know what you think. Let me know all the places that I went wrong. Hopefully not. Any ideas that you have for figuring out the grade coming around there, if I end up just putting in a 1-2 turn helix, things like that. Any other ideas for doing the kind of brackets? I've seen metal shelf brackets, and I'm not sure if I'm going to go that route, but a few little things to tidy up. Otherwise this is looking pretty good, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.